Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Mira, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Jason Waterman. Hi, Jason.
Morning, how are you?
How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thank you for coming along.
Thanks for having me.
Diving straight into the podcast and going for the big question.
Yeah.
Who is Jason?
Who is Jason? That is a deep question. I think to the kind of theme, right, like I have always seen myself as, from a working class background. The way that I was brought up was that my mum and dad were both at work all the time. I actually saw them this weekend and I was talking to them about this and like some of the things that they had to go through when we were kids. So, my dad has plenty of tales of some of the crazy jobs and places that he lived in kind of before I was born and after my brother and I were born. So very much that kind of background. I think probably quite different to a lot of my peers in that I didn't go to university. I didn't like education, to be honest. Lots of teenage boys, right, they don't like education because they'd rather be doing lots of other things. But I kind of quickly realised that wasn't for me. So I've worked since I was 17. And I think that is probably quite a big part of my personality because you talk to people and it's like, what university did you go to or what did you study or, all that sort of stuff. And I just never have really had that. So it's always been kind of work and sport were the things that formed a lot of my personality. So, yeah, I guess there's always that element of it that I used to have a bit of a chip on my shoulder about it in that it's like, am I not smart enough? Or, I didn't go to university for whatever reason. But actually, I think it's served me really well in terms of like my view of people and the world. It's kind of been shaped by the fact that perhaps didn't go to university. None of my family ever have. Obviously, it's a lot more common for people to do that now, but I never did. Actually, that I think for me worked really well. So, I think that's probably formed a big part of my personality is that I took a up and down, strange, different route into the sort of work that I do now.
And so outside of sitting here on this podcast, would you describe yourself in the way that you've just described yourself?
So whenever people ask me that question, I think most people tend to go to work, right? It's like, I'm a X. I hate talking about work. I know that's a strange thing to say, but I find it strange that people, I know it's literally what I've just done potentially, but people tie their personalities to here's a thing I do for 40 hours a week. So no, I probably wouldn't describe myself like that.
So let's try.
Let's try again.
I don't want to try again because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I do want to go to naturally who would Jason say he is? Yeah.
I think naturally my personality is slightly more introverted. I think people assume that I'm probably not introverted because I will get involved, but that's a real social battery drain, right? So I think when people have those sorts of conversations, I do feel more introverted. So that's a massive part, I think, of why I have the certain conversations and why I maybe describe myself in certain ways. If people ask me that question now, I would say I'm a dad to a little girl. So my wife gave birth to our daughter Sadie in May of last year. So that is the number one thing for me now is that I think I'm a dad first, dad and husband first, and everything else is a very distant second. So that is the most important thing to me now is being a dad, which wouldn't have been my answer, obviously, in the past, and not really even the way that I would have thought about it. If you'd have asked me that question 5 years ago, it wouldn't be that the main thing is that I'm a dad first and foremost. It would have been work or something else. So I would describe myself as a dad to a little girl first and foremost now.
Talk to me about where Jason started and what your earliest memories are from childhood.
I'm convinced, and my mum and dad often tell me that this can't be true, but I'm convinced I have a memory of being outside a caravan, and I think it was my great uncle's caravan. But my mum and dad tell me I was only one when this memory could. So I think they assume I've seen a picture, but I'm convinced that's my earliest memory, or that I remember my first birthday cake, which was like a white one with a blue outline. Whether that's true, I don't know. But I guess early kind of childhood memories are similar to lots of people, I guess, in that it's, growing up with a younger brother, running around in the garden, playing football, in the mud, driving little cars around and things like that. So, yeah, early memories will always be family orientated, or me being in the garden, because I feel that's where I spent 95% of my childhood, much to my mum and dad's displeasure a lot of the time, because I was breaking fences or kicking footballs over the same fences. So, yeah, it will always be kind of garden related in terms of my earliest memories.
And in some ways that's great, because, if you were growing up today, you'd probably remember being in front of a laptop or an iPad or, one of the many devices that we have available.
Yes. Yeah.
What is it about your childhood and your early years, not necessarily childhood, but your early years, that comes up for you today? So you talked a bit about not going to university, and people are really surprised about that, etc. So talk to me about your journey to where you are today.
I naturally, as I mentioned, struggled with education. I had all the same teenage boy issues, right? Like problems with authority and not liking being told what to do in whatever form that kind of manifested. So, I didn't find concentrating at school easy. I had enough intelligence to be able to kind of skirt through a lot of things, and that's fortunate, but I only really enjoyed certain classes and certain teachers, right? So I naturally kind of finished school, obviously got GCSEs and stuff, and then went to college and was really quickly, like, even in a more relaxed environment where I could wear what I wanted to wear, and if I didn't want to go to class on a day, I didn't have to. Even that kind of didn't really suit me. So, yeah, really quickly I found that I didn't want to study. I didn't want to be in education. Unlike all my peers who had already picked out what university they were going to or what degrees they were going to study, I was like, I need to do something different. My mum and dad were like, you can't sit on your ass at home and either not go to college or not have a job. So very quickly I was in a full-time job at 17. My first full-time job was, I worked in a shop for a little while. So like a clothes shop on a high street down from where I lived. And then I worked in a call centre for a few years, but that was at 17. So obviously really different to everyone that I'd grown up with, but it was great because I had a few £100 in my pocket each month that they didn't have.
And so when you think about university, was that implied? Was that pressure to go? And so when you didn't go, was that a bit of a shock or a surprise to everyone and to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely at school did want to go. I had ambitions to be a sports journalist when I was 14, 15, 16. You obviously can't do that without going to university. I'd inquired about how I'd get into this with like local newspapers and stuff, and it was, go to university. So there was definitely that element of it. I should do that. That's the kind of path that I should go to. Every school has a careers advisor, right? And I've got a lot of opinions on how good or bad they are, but the two options going to school in Portsmouth were go to university like everyone else is doing, or join the Navy, which everyone who isn't going to university is going to join the Navy because you live in Portsmouth. So
they were literally the two options provided.
They were the two
Join
options.
the Navy or go to university.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you'd have seen
nothing in between?
Nothing in between. And if you'd seen me as a 16-year-old, I was not built like someone that should be in the armed forces, perhaps. So, yeah, they were the two options. And I came away from that like, well, I'm screwed, basically. Like, what is it that I do? So, yeah, it was implied, I guess. It obviously, my generation, university became a lot more accessible for people, right? Like if I think of my mum and dad's generation, like you had to be super bright to go to university, and it was a massive thing to be able to get into university and go. So I guess that accessibility meant that all my peers were like, well, that's obviously what I'm going to do. And it just never really struck the right chord. Like I was like, I don't really know why, and I'm not sure I can sit and concentrate for another
4 years.
Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, it just never really blended, and then the Navy was
not an option.
Was a non-starter straight away. So yeah, I basically took the first job I could find. You know, I think I kind of slightly cringed thinking about how I got that job now. I wore a full suit. I walked into a high street recruitment agency as a 17-year-old in a very ill-fitting suit. So they must have laughed at me and thought, bless him. But, you know, they sent me along to an assessment day interview for a insurance company, I think it was, where I got the job. So yeah, started in a call centre, like car insurance claims and stuff. So yeah, it was quite quick that I was like, I prefer to be at work. Obviously everyone that I was there and with was older than me as well. So I spent all of that sort of time being around people that were older than me that seemed like they had an idea of like what they were going to do, even if they were only 22, which in hindsight is probably not true. And I'm sure if I spoke to any of them now, they'd be like, no, I haven't got a clue.
Still don't have a clue.
Yeah, very much so here as well. Yeah. So, but being around, I think older people kind of had helped me think about work and education in a slightly different way. And that it's like, well, education perhaps for me isn't the be all and end all, and that I can go and work and figure stuff out in my own way.
And so what happened, I suppose, with friendships and people of your own age in terms of connecting with people and having friends? Did they all kind of scatter and then go to university around the country? What was connection and not being one of the very few that didn't go to university?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was pretty fortunate. So my best friends now, best man at my wedding is you know, we met when we were 10, 11 years old, right? So we've got 25 years worth of friendship, and I guess I was lucky that I could tag along to his uni nights out, and you know, he wasn't far. He was only in Bournemouth, so not far from Portsmouth, right? So I was able to continue to kind of tag along with him. But I think I obviously valued all my friends that were the same age, but I also quite enjoyed that aspect of getting to know people that were a little bit older than me, or you know, had a different upbringing or whatever it was as well. So, you know, I played football and a whole bunch of different things. So I'd already was used to being with people that were a little bit older than me or a little bit different as well anyway. So actually I found that having the peer group that I had from school was great, but also I had all these other friends as well, which was good and interesting.
What trajectory did your life take? What were the influences, be it moments, people, that helped navigate and help you through that?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few things, but it is quite tricky to think about it as like 18-year-old me. And I say this to people all the time now. I've been doing a lot of early careers work recently, working with lots of very bright early 20s, and they're concerned that they don't have their life figured out. And I'm like, just don't worry about that, right? Like, it'll come and you've got to try things. I think football actually was one of those things that helped me figure out what it is that I wanted to do.
Outside of being a footballer? Outside
of being a footballer, yeah. Once that dream died, I was playing with these guys that were older than me, and they were turning up in these flash cars. And none of them particularly, you know, they weren't academics, right? They weren't at university or that sort of side of things. So it's like, what is it that you guys do? How do I get a BMW, basically, was the question. Breaking it down in its simplistic form. And they were all in sales. And had someone have said to me, this careers advisor, when I was 16, one of the things you can go and do, you can't concentrate, you like talking to people, learn a sales thing, right? Like, go and work with people, understand, like there's a natural skill set there that I have or had. It's like, that's what the advice should have been. So speaking to these guys, it's like, well, I do sales. Speaking to people, selling stuff. They all sold a range of different things, right? But that was the kind of moment where I was like, okay, I think I can do a job where it's obviously manifested in a wildly different way. Like, I'm not a good salesman and not a salesman now, but it led me into the field of I should work with people primarily. Again, had you have asked me at 18 whether HR and that sort of side of things was where I was going to go, probably not. But actually, it was the door opening of you need to work with people. So I think there was, again, a bit of a path to get to that point. But yeah, those guys, I guess, kind of unexpectedly mentored me into, yeah, just give this a go, like try this out. You know, you might be good at it, you might be rubbish at it, but even if you try a few different things in this like people-orientated space, you'll figure it out eventually.
What happens next? And not necessarily from a work point of view, but from a life point of view. How does Jason get to where we are today?
Yeah, but I mean, it's not a straightforward line, I guess, in that I was fortunate that I could try a few different things, right? So I was still, you know, teenager, early 20s, living at home with mum and dad. So, you know, I had that flexibility to be able to say, I'm going to try these different jobs. Like everyone does, I stumbled into recruitment when I was 20, basically, which the firm that I worked for at the time only hired graduates. So I somehow managed to get my foot in the door.
So they only hire graduates, but you got there. Okay. So there's a Jason flair coming through.
Well, I think it's because I'd been selling stuff basically for 18 months in a professional environment, right? Like, so, you know, I'd worked through various kind of call centres and things, but, you know, I'd got to the point where I was working for a mortgage brokerage, and I was able to get into the team that was doing the work around selling products, basically. So I had a skill set that actually, no, I didn't go to university, but I could immediately sell, right? So I could get on the phone, and I wasn't concerned about calling a CEO of a company because I'd been doing that for 18 months. Whereas the peers that I had that had been at university, they were smarter than me, and they had, you know, a bit of paper that said they'd studied this thing, but they'd never been forced to sit on a phone. And, you know, this is more than 15 years ago when working practices were slightly different to what they are now, right? And you had your chair taken away if you didn't do a certain number of hours on the phone. I was used to that. Like, I already knew that. So that kind of, I guess, came through in those early stages. I was fortunate that the person who introduced me, I got talking to in a pub, and I think we'd both had a few drinks, and I was able to like worm my way in that way. And I was like, please just promise me that you'll call me on Monday. And to her credit, she did. So I kind of wormed my way in and was a slightly different profile, I guess, to everyone that was around me.
Tell me a bit about that experience.
I spent 3 and a bit years at BCG, so Boston Consultant Group. So obviously one of the biggest firms in the world, but one of the leading players in the management consulting world. I'm not your typical, I mean, tattoos and nose piercings and not a graduate. So I'm definitely not your typical BCG employee from the outset. So I was incredibly lucky to get the opportunity to work there and learn a whole bunch of things that I did. I guess I kind of came in the back route a little bit in that I started there as a contractor. So working on, you know, initially I was there for 3 months just to support a couple of projects. I'd just left the world of recruitment agency. I was like, at that point in life, I don't know, 26, 27 maybe, I was like, what am I doing with my life? I don't want to work at a recruitment agency and I need to figure something else out. And this had kind of come through a friend. And I didn't know a lot really about BCG. And then obviously you turn up to the building, it's like, oh, this is serious. Yeah. I was also not dressed like a BCG consultant. So I stepped in and I was like, okay, I'm not prepared for this. Like, they're going to just tell me to get out of the building, basically.
And what was that whole cultural experience for you like in that sense then? Because BCG hire a very experienced, and again, I'm talking about from a graduate point of view, so top graduates, highly intellectual people. This is outside in rather than inside out. What was that day when you walked in? What was the emotions going through?
I think the main one was that I was surrounded by adults and that I didn't necessarily feel like an adult, right? Like, in that they were all very, very smart, really actually intimidating, I think, in that they just knew all this stuff that I didn't know. So I really felt, I struggled at first just to be around these people, sat with them having conversations, because they were so smart in a way that I'd just never experienced before. So the first 2 or 3 weeks, I was kind of like, shit, I shouldn't be here. Someone's going to suss me out that I'm not worthy of sitting in this big green office. And actually, quite quickly, I was like, well, these people are the smartest people that I've ever met, and probably I'm likely to interact with in my life. So I need to just try and ask as many questions about as wide a range of topics as possible, right? And whether that's work or non-work stuff. And so I just basically then spent all of my time there just trying to soak up as much as I could from these people, because it was just an opportunity that I'd never had. Right? I'd never been around like this caliber of intellect. So yeah, I just took the opportunity to ask questions about whatever I could, right? And that'd be like, obviously all the work stuff, like how do you get so smart and how do you get that job and why is your bonus so big? But then it's like...
Amazing. Money Supermarket Group are proud sponsors of A Class of Their Own podcast. Their portfolio includes well-known brands such as Money Saving Expert, Quidco, offering great cashback deals, and the renowned Money Supermarket, a leading price comparison website. Championing an inclusive environment where every voice is valued, they are dedicated to leading positive change. They collaborate with schools to promote diversity, educate on equity, and partner with charities to address key reasons for financial fear today. To learn more and help your household save money, click the links in the show notes below. What did that moment give you or teach you that you've taken on or gone, actually, it wasn't as big as it was in my mind at that point in time, reflecting back?
I mean, I think the whole thing helped round me out as a human, to be honest, in that it gave me a whole bunch of different perspectives on how I treat and work with people, and it built a whole bunch of mental muscles that I just didn't have before, right, in terms of leadership, because I think a big part of working at a company like that is that they drill it into you really quickly. How do you lead things? Obviously, the point of the job of what a lot of people do there is I'm going to tell someone how to fix a thing or do something. So from day one, you're told this is how you do it and lead in a certain way. So it helped build a whole bunch of things: decision-making, communication, empathy, all these things that I guess were in there, but that I just didn't really ever
unlock,
tap into. Yeah. So like definitely helps push all those things to the forefront, in that like being at work isn't just deliver on stuff, it's build relationships and, try and be a good human that people want to be around. And I think from there, that served me really well, because it's, the friendships and relationships that I built in that time have served me amazingly well, right? Like I've got jobs and I've worked with people and worked on projects purely from the relationships that I built there. Obviously, having that on your CV unlocks a few doors and stuff, but I now am so much better at, I think, work, but then understanding myself purely because I was around these people that were smart and had like been coached in a way to unlock those sorts of things within themselves.
And did you see any levels of prejudice, I suppose, when you don't come from the same backgrounds or the same language, or you were asking these questions? Did anyone treat you less than?
I don't think I ever got outright obviously treated differently. I'm much more likely to swear than some of my other colleagues, right? And as I say, I've got tattoos, so I definitely my accent is different to the vast majority of people that I worked with. So there was always kind of an element at first of like, who's the kid in the room? So there definitely was that. And I think I always have, whether it be there or since, I've always had an element of like, what did you study at university? And I'll say, I didn't go. It's like, oh. And then I do sometimes sense it with people, whether it be there or since, that it's like, there's like a 5 to 10% drop in respect, or like, yeah, they're just people were just a little bit more like, oh, okay, maybe you're not quite as good as I thought you were, just because
you didn't go to
didn't
university.
Go to uni. Yeah. So I mean, definitely have seen like that elitist kind of thing where the vast majority of people around me will be red brick, super smart, copy and paste in some instances, right? Like I've worked in environments where we'll only recruit this type of person, plays on a sports team at Durham, and that's the only sort of person that we recruit. And it's like, well, that's not me, right? And so if that's what you want, then it's not even worth it, because like I'm not that person, and I also don't want to be that person, right? That's not me, and it never will be. So if that's the sort of bloke you're after, then what's the point? So, and I think people then find that strange when you're like, no, I don't want to be around that environment, because naturally they tend to be high achieving, smart groups of people, right? And that's great, but I can't sit in a room of people that are exactly the same, that think in the same way, and there's not a lot of diversity of thought, because it gets boring really quick. As I've said, I've got a short attention span, so I need to challenge and be challenged, right? I need to be provoked, or to be able to provoke for the right reasons, right? Like I'm not just coming in and setting fire to tables and stuff, right? It's being there to challenge people. And actually, if everyone thinks the same way, then it's impossible to do that, I think. So that's what I've learned being at BCG, was working with the super smart people that I did. They all thought about things in wildly different ways, right? They're all super creative, very smart. So they would think about something that I wouldn't have thought about I could have sat in that room for 10 years and I never would have thought of the thing that one person has just been like, oh, just do that. So giving that diversity and appreciation of diversity of thought was massive.
And so we've spent some time talking about work, but what about Jason outside of work? How has stuff that's happened in your younger years shown up in who you are today?
Yeah, good question. I think I definitely have been shaped by like discipline, I guess, for use of a better word, in that there's an anxiety, I guess, in my personality, and to use a work analogy, people are always like, oh, you just get things done really quickly, and I kind of always took that as a good compliment, right? Yeah. But actually, I think the more that I've dug into it as I get older and I kind of understand myself a little bit more and have therapy and things, actually it's like anxieties, that there's a worry that actually it's like, oh, if I don't do this thing, that person's going to be upset with me, or like I'm going to get in trouble, right? So there's like a deep-rooted immaturity there, I guess, and it's like, I need to do this thing in case I get in trouble. So that's always kind of shown up in that I'm like, I hate being late, right? That sends me around the bend, and my wife constantly takes the mickey out of me for it, but like it really stresses me out, and I think a lot of that is because of these anxieties that maybe have just built up, and now I understand myself a little bit more than I did when I was younger. I can almost put my finger on it.
And when you say the anxieties, where, how, what do they stem from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really struggle to kind of put my finger on a lot of it. I think I've naturally always been a bit of a worrier and an overthinker about the daftest things, right? And that's just kind of become clearer to me, strangely, as I've got older. So I think I've naturally, I think back to even being a kid going to football at the weekend, right? Like I would play on a Sunday morning and I'd be awake all night on a Saturday night thinking about, what if I play bad tomorrow? Or what if I get injured? What if this thing happens? It's like, well, shit happens, right? Like you can't control these things. And my dad always used to say to me, like, you can't control it, so like don't worry about it. Which in hindsight is not necessarily the best advice, but he is quite strong in his view that it's like there's nothing you can do to control these things. So like sometimes you've just got to ride it out and deal with it. But I would always have this thing where I'm like, well, tomorrow, like what is it that may or may not happen tomorrow? And that obviously then changes as you get older and you think about things that actually matter, rather than am I going to play well on a Sunday morning. But so it kind of feels like it's always been there. I don't know if there's necessarily like a thing that happened in my life, right, that has given me mental health ups and downs, but it's definitely just kind of always been there. And then as I've got older, manifested in a whole bunch of different ways. And from, not having any anxieties for years to all my motivation's gone. My mood is super low. I don't want to go to work. Or I can't stop thinking about this conversation that I had 5 years ago where I said a stupid thing, and that's all I can think about for days on end, right? So it's like not a straight path, if that makes sense.
And when you talk about that example of something that happened 5 years ago and a conversation that happened 5 years ago, is there something that triggers that thought or a connected thought, or have you found a pattern in terms of behaviour of why you then go down this route?
Yeah, I mean, I said earlier about like the introversion aspect of my personality, and I can do extroverted, but I definitely, it's like a phone battery, right? Like when your phone is starting to slow down, you're like, okay, this is going to turn off soon, right? So I definitely have that part of my personality where I'm like, I have to either just be away from people for a little while, right? Like and just chill out and recharge almost. And that typically solves the problems, and then I don't feel tired or anxious. But actually, if I don't get to that point and my battery runs out before I plug myself in, then that's when I find that my kind of brain and mind tends to then start to wander to these places that aren't particularly helpful. A lot of it will be tiredness and that extroversion beating the introversion, right? Like it's unbalanced in terms of its weighting. So when that happens, that tends to be like something will just pop in there, right? That's, oh, well, what if you don't do this thing or you don't wake up until right? And then I tend to snowball really quickly. So my wife has got really good at spotting it and can tell, because there is like a real physical, like, you just
get
shrink,
smaller,
right?
and
Yeah,
shrink.
definitely. So like there's obviously the mental aspect of it, that it's like you don't see yourself, but definitely feel like, for me at least anyway, there's like a very obvious, visible, physical change in my being, which my wife has got really good at spotting, and being like, go and have a nap or go out for a walk, right? And just kind of clear your mind a little bit. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle, right? Because as you start feeling like that, your motivation to do anything, right, just disappears. So the thought then of being like, go for a run or just go for a walk or go and get a coffee or whatever it is, I'm like, oh, I don't want to. Like, I want to just sit here and be miserable for a little while, which obviously is not helpful. So yeah, I'm grateful to my wife being the extroverted, brilliant person that she is, and that she's like, get up, like I'm going to push you out the door. So yeah, she's massively helpful in that. But I think it's that like social battery tends to be a trigger on that side.
You mentioned therapy. Do you want to delve a bit into that? And the answer can be no as well.
No, yeah, happy to. I think I was having a conversation with a friend about it this week, actually, and that it's still not a thing I think enough men do. There's still a stigma, I think, and actually I've found myself falling victim to it recently, because I had a therapy appointment that was over lunch at work, and I didn't say to my team I was going to have therapy. I was like, oh, I've got to go to the doctors, right? So it was fine to be able to say, oh, I've got a physical thing, and no one asked me what that physical thing was, right? Like I haven't got a broken leg or anything, but no one was like, what's your physical thing? And it was so much easier to say I'm going to the doctors than going to see a therapist. But I have been seeing a therapist on and off for a few years. So I know that still a lot of my friends don't do that. And you have conversation with them, and there'll be some that just don't have any anxieties, and it's just completely mentally, mental health is at 100%. But so many of them, when you talk to them, are like, you should just go and, like, it's great for me to talk to you. And like by nature, I'm in HR, so I have some sympathetic, empathetic skills, but I'm not a therapist. So like, yeah, I can help you and give you a cuddle, right? But you should also then go and talk to someone. So I found talking to a professional has helped me try to understand why is it that my mood sometimes is like super blue, and how do I then correct is not the right word, but like try and deal with it, right? So it's always, I feel like it's always there, and the main thing for me is understanding why it is that I feel in the way, rather than like solve the overall issue.
And do you recall what the trigger and how you decided, if we go back to the conversation you've just had, which is men still struggle to go to therapy, so what was it that gave you that push almost to go and have those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have a very physical moment in time. I think I probably have always had some well, definitely the anxieties, but like depression symptoms in there as well. My wife had a miscarriage a few years ago, and that amongst a whole lot of other things made us both very sad, understandably, obviously. But as part, not directly related to it, but in the following weeks, we were obviously sad and working through it and figuring out kind of what happens next. But I just had one day where I was just in the fetal position crying, right? And that's not a normal thing for me to do, right? Like I'll cry at a film, don't get me wrong, like I don't mind crying, but to be like sobbing on the floor was quite physically profound, right? So my wife was like, well, you need to try and figure this out in some way for me, for her, for now our daughter, right? Like just to make sure that I'm okay. But it was like a very physical
reaction,
sad moment in time.
Of course it was sad.
I'd obviously considered therapy before that, in that like, I have these feelings that aren't always happy feelings, happy thoughts. There's something in there that is making me sad or anxious, but it was never enough, right? Like there wasn't that moment to be like, push, go and do it, until I had this volcanic moment that was horrific. So that then made me be like, well, I do have to go and figure it out. So I then kind of went through a process of like talking to a whole bunch of different therapists, because then it's like, what is it that you actually want from this? Because at first I was just like, I don't want to be sad. But then, as you start talking to different people, there's lots of different ways that you can kind of go about these therapeutic exercises. So then I was like, oh my God, right? Like there's a whole bunch of different things here that I can learn, coping mechanisms and learning about myself. And that actually then puts you on a journey of being like, right, so I don't want to be sad, right? I want to figure that part out, but actually there's a whole bunch of other stuff that this will help me figure out as well, which is why I really wish that men would spend more time in these sorts of environments, because we seem to be simple beings, I think, a lot of the time, right? But a lot of the time there's a lot of complex things going on because men don't really talk as much as their partners might do, or the women in their life, right? So getting guys to kind of crack the shell a little bit and open up, you'd find that conversations that I have with people at work, they tend to then be like a waterfall of emotions, right? That happy and sad, that they're like, we've been holding on to that for a while, haven't you? And it only took me giving you a 2-second longer hug than I normally would for you to start talking about it.
And so you found that therapy's actually helped you connect with people in a different way?
Yeah, I think it's been helpful for me in a work environment, in that I think it's like amped up empathy levels. So I think I've always been relatively empathetic, but now I feel like it's one of my core skills now, right? Like if I can find something to share some empathy with, right? It takes that step on from sympathy, right? So I feel like I can connect with people now in a slightly different way. Some of that's like a maturing and stuff, but yeah, being able to say, like, spend some time talking about things, like open up a little bit to me, has definitely added something, I think, to my whole being, right? Being able to just sit and shut up and listen. So I think, again, you can mistake empathy for like, yeah, I know that, I've got a thing, where people just talk. So actually I think being able to just shut up and actively listen to people sometimes has helped. And that's come from super uncomfortable therapy conversations, right? Where your therapist just doesn't say anything to you, and they're like, keep going. So that like thing has unlocked something in me a little bit where I can just sit and hopefully actively listen to people to give them the space to be like, I feel good or bad or indifferent, whatever it is.
Thank you for sharing that, because I can't imagine that was an easy thing to share. That's a difficult time for everyone involved, including your wife and you. When you think about your future and you think about what comes next, what's success for Jason?
Yeah, this is a really good question, actually, something I've been thinking a hell of a lot about recently. If you'd have asked me that question 5 years ago, it's all like job title and how much money am I going to earn and how prestigious does my CV look and, you know, how big is my house, how flash is my car.
So the traditional societal norms of
I think
what success is.
Keeping up with the Joneses, right? Like that definitely is what drove me in an early part of my life and career, was like, I have to hit this goal, I have to have this job title by this age. And I think some of this is tied to the things I'm talking about there with therapy and a maturity level that I achieved those things and I got there and it's like, oh, this hasn't done anything for me. Like, yeah, I've got more money in my bank account, which is great because I can go on nice holidays or buy more stuff. But then I've just got more stuff and holidays. You then just are looking forward to booking the next holiday, right? So, yeah, I think for me now it's success is being able to spend as much time as I possibly can with my family, with my wife and my daughter. But actually it's doing stuff that I enjoy. So I've spent far too long in the pursuit of these goals, right, professional and personal goals, doing stuff that I just don't enjoy, actually. And I speak from a definite position of privilege to be able to say, well, I'm going to try and stop doing things that I don't like and start doing things that I do like. And I know that's a super simplistic way of looking at it, but I think I've kind of hit that point, and a lot of it is to do with the birth of our daughter, that I'm like, well, if I don't like doing a thing, I can find something else that I do like doing that might not pay me as much money or might not be as long term, but actually it's much more fulfilling for me as well. And ultimately I want to be happy, right, in that the time that I spend with my wife and my daughter, we're at our best. And I don't want to be like, I've worked super long hours again today, or I'm in a rubbish mood because I've had another bad day at work doing this thing that I don't care about. So now it's like, how do I go to that point where I start doing things that I enjoy? So that I think the ultimate goal now is, as cheesy as it sounds, is like that happiness piece, right? Because what's the point? And I've had that conversation with a few people recently, like, life's really short, right? And you obviously get a slightly different perspective from things as I have becoming a parent. But yeah, what's the point a lot of the time in doing these things that you hate or that make you unhappy or trigger you in a certain way, when actually you can, if the possibility is there to take your time and figure out, actually, these are the things that I want and need from work, relationships, whatever, then like focusing on that and go for that. So yeah, happiness, I guess, is the short answer.
And if you were to relive and go and give advice to Jason at 16, what would be the advice, or multiple advices? That's not even the right word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Ooh, I would have said move to London earlier. So I moved to London in my late 20s. I would have definitely said like move earlier, try things, right? Like I definitely stopped myself trying stuff when I was younger, because naturally you're worried about all the things like, you know, the car and the house and the job title and what people's perception of you is. But actually no one cares. No one's looking at you really. Everyone's looking at themselves, right? So why not go and try something a bit random? And I still followed a relatively traditional career path, right? But actually, could I have gone off and tried something super different? Like I studied drama at school. I got an A in my GCSEs in drama. And then I left school and have never even thought about it since, right? And I didn't study anything dramatic at college. Obviously, I didn't go to university. I've never acted or done anything like that. But actually, at 16, what I really should have done is pursued that in some way. And it could have been that I realised that that's not who I am, or that isn't my skill set and I can't act, or whatever that thing is. But actually, just try stuff. Would
Just
probably
experiment with it.
just have a go at it. And if you're rubbish, then fine. But the only way you're going to find out is by giving it a go. So yeah, I definitely would think, looking back, it's like just try and do more things that are out of your comfort zone. Very anxiety led by sticking in your lane, right, for a really long time until quite recently, where I'm like, well, I don't want to do that anymore. So I think, yeah, like step out of your comfort zone a little bit and try stuff. Don't be afraid.
So we started off this conversation with who is Jason, and reflecting back on the conversation we've just had, what, if anything, would you change if I was to ask you that question again, which is who is Jason?
Yeah, good question. I think to kind of what we've been talking about at the end there is happier than I probably was in the past, in that, you know, I feel like I now, you know, I'm 30, nearly 36, and I say to people all the time, like, I still don't know what it is that I want to be when I grow up, right? Like, and which sounds like a ridiculous thing for someone in their mid-30s to say, and that you just assume you know what I'm doing, right? So I think that's fine. I'm not necessarily sure what it is that I want to be professionally, but then personally, I've never been more aligned in my life. So yeah, I think happy is definitely the focus for me now, right? So it's like doing things that make me happy is who I am. I think that makes sense.
Thank you so much for sharing. I know not all of that will have been easy, but we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed that conversation, then please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family, and keep spreading the word to those that haven't discovered us yet. It makes a huge impact on our ability to have the people you want. Keep being you through connection, learning, and play. You are a class of your own.